Hello, I'm Valora Washington, CEO of the CAYL Institute. That's Community Advocates for Young Learners. We are so delighted that you've joined us today for this episode of the CAYL Catalyst webinar series. Thank you so much for joining us. We're glad that you're here. Today, we're going to have a conversation with Rosemarie Allen. She is Dean of the School of Education at the Metropolitan State University at Denver, and she is president of the Institute for Racial Equity and Excellence. She is one of our nation's leading voices on equity, early childhood education, anti-bias education, and how to transform systems to better serve young children and their families. So we're really delighted to have her. She is a very welcome guest here on the CAYL Catalyst webinar series, which this year is highlighting leaders in our field and helping us to learn from their experiences. But before we hear from Rosemarie, here are a few announcements. First of all, I want to remind you that all of our webinars are free, they're recorded, and they're available on our website and on YouTube so that everybody can hear them and participate regardless of your schedule or your time zone. And if you've joined us live here today, we encourage you to write in the chat and tell us who you are and where you are from. Everyone who's registered for this webinar next week is going to receive an email from us with a copy of this webinar, as well as resources that can help you dig deeper into the things that Rosemarie Allen talks about. And finally, if you're live on this webinar, we invite you to join the after party. The after party is a live Q&A link that you can ask your own questions of Rosemarie Allen or interact with her in ways that you might like to do so after this webinar. We also invite you to stay engaged with the CAYL Institute by joining our YouTube channel or joining us on Facebook or joining us on our website. So stay engaged with us. We also invite you to make a gift to the CAYL Institute, pay it forward. We welcome your gift of any amount to help us continue this webinar series and offer other free services for you. So as we prepare to listen to Rosemarie Allen, we want you to think about the questions you might like to ask her today. We know that one of the things that she talks a lot about is that every child deserves to be seen and to be valued. And so I'm wondering if you have some thoughts you'd like to share with her about what you think children need today that previous generations did not need so urgently. Or also, is there an uncomfortable truth that educators need to confront if they want every child to flourish? Write in the chat, tell us what you think, and also join the after party to ask your questions live of Dr. Rosemarie Allen. So as we get ready to hear from her today, I want to invite her to join me on the screen. And I want to say, Rosemarie, welcome. Really so happy to have you here today. So if you will join me on the screen, it's a delight to have you. And I really want to tell you, I'm a big admirer of your work. I really appreciate the way that you combine storytelling with the data. And it's a great opportunity to have a conversation with you. And I love the way that in your work, you're always encouraging everyone to be courageous in thinking about how we can be advocates and researchers for young children. So some of our listeners might not be as familiar with your work, so I want to introduce it a little bit by saying that you are a recognized authority in early childhood education and equity in issues of anti-bias education. You've really dedicated your career to helping to ensure that every child has equal opportunity, that you not only identify inequities, but you also give us pathways to deal with these inequities. You've been a professor, you've been an educational leader, an author, and you're a very passionate advocate. I love listening to your work and reading it. So, what I like most about it is how a lot of your focus has been on creating atmosphere of belonging for every child. That's something that you stress a lot. So I wonder if you might just start the conversation today by sharing with our listeners a little bit about your story and what brings you to this much passion about being sure that children are seen and valued.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Valora. You know, I was the child that if you looked up challenging behaviors, you'd find my picture. At least that's what I was led to believe. And as much as I loved school, I didn't have a great experience. I
Mhm.
felt that I was misunderstood and I got in trouble quite often for things that I just didn't understand. And I decided very early that I wanted to be the teacher that I needed as a young child.
Mhm.
I, from my earliest memory, I can't remember thinking I'd be anything but a teacher. I was the child who played school after school. My younger siblings had to be my students, and I would gather the neighborhood children. But even before that, I remember gathering my dolls and my stuffed animals and playing school. So I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but I also knew I wanted to be a kind teacher.
Mhm.
And I knew I wanted to be a teacher that welcomed everyone. And that realization came probably at 3 years old.
Wow.
Yes.
That's amazing. It's really impressive that you say that you wanted to be the teacher that you never had. What kind of experiences did you have with teachers, and what might we learn from that as educators ourselves?
No, it's very interesting because in the beginning, when I got in trouble, I didn't know why. I really didn't understand. I remember getting in trouble for digging a hole in the playground because I wanted to see China on the other side.
Hmm.
Those really innocent things. And then after a while, Valora, I began to feel targeted and provoked. Once the label was there,
Hmm.
teachers had negative expectations of me. They would provoke. I remember one time the teacher told me as we were taking a math test that if you get out of your seat just one time, you're going to get an F. And of course, I don't know if I dropped the pencil or threw the pencil. Somehow, pencil was on the floor and I got up to get it. And she put a big red F on my paper. And that was just one of those situations that could have been avoided. And I just felt targeted. And at one point, because I was getting into so much trouble, they decided to put me in special education. And back then, way back then, during that time, in order to put a child in special ed, you had to give them an IQ test. So my IQ was off the charts. I actually tested genius level, and then they didn't know what to do with me. So they skipped me a grade, and they wanted to skip me another grade, but my dad said, no way. You're going to have to figure out what to do with her here because she can't keep skipping because she's not learning what she needs to learn. And they decided, okay, well, we'll give her extra things to do. But after that, I was labeled Miss Smarty Pants. Oh, Miss Smarty Pants in a very negative way. So again, it wasn't a pleasant, compassionate, caring environment. I felt that I fought my way through school. It was truly a source of trauma for me.
Absolutely, I can see that. I'm really wondering. I know that from your work that as a young child you went to segregated schools, and later on you went to more integrated schools. How did that change your experiences?
Yes, thank you for asking because I am a beneficiary of the Brown versus Board of Education decision. So at first, most of my neighborhood schools were all Black, and they brought in the white teachers. And the teachers came in and they really had no experience with Black children. And then I went to an integrated school. What happened is I got tired of being in trouble. I was expelled from three middle schools called junior high back then. And I talked to my dad and said, I don't want to go to the neighborhood school because they expect this. I don't think I can ever get out of this cycle of being labeled. So I went to school out of district. And Valora, I never got in trouble again. I don't know how he arranged it, but he arranged it so that my records didn't follow me for a couple of months. So by the time I started, no one knew me. My past wasn't part of my future or present. And I did very, very well. Never, like I said, got in trouble again.
One of the things that's interesting, a lot of times when we think about the challenging behavior and expulsion and exclusion of Black children specifically, we often think about this happening with Black boys. But I think in some of your research that you've really found some interesting things about Black girls in this situation.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting because we did not focus on girls. And there's a wonderful book called Pushout that really gives a lot of data about what happens to Black girls starting very, very, very early. And Dr. Darielle Blevins even did research on middle school girls suspension rates, and it tied back, Flora, to their experiences they had very early in early childhood and kindergarten. And she
Mhm.
found that those children who were mistreated very early, they were the ones most mistreated and suspended from middle school because they made up their minds very early that teachers would never treat them that way again. And as I was working on my dissertation, like I said, I was in trouble all the time, suspended, expelled. I was reading um, a publication called the Pygmalion Theory or something like that. And there was a line in that journal article that said that the journal was about what happened to Black children with white teachers after the Brown versus Board of Education decision. And there was one line that said, little Black girls were treated worse of all. It talked about how Black children were criticized more, complimented less, ignored. But that line, and Black girls who were smart were treated worse of all. Valora, that took me to my knees. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. I'll never forget it. And all I wanted was for my dad to know. And he had passed quite a few years before. But I just kept thinking, Daddy, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. And I just wanted him to know because there I was at that late stage in my 50s, thinking I was a bad kid, a bad person. All those years I held that. And that article freed me to let me know that it wasn't just me. And this is where the data comes in. Because even with families, when their children are constantly in trouble and getting suspended, and they're little boys, and they come home and they say, well, Mom, everybody else did it, or I'm not the only one, or the teacher's picking on me. When families can look at the data, they can see that that child is telling the truth for the most part. And that's why it's so important for us to ensure that our children have a safe space to land at home. And I really believe what saved me was that my dad believed in me. He believed
Mhm.
me. He was there for me, and he defended me. And when I was wrong, he took care of it at home. But he just knew that if I did it, I'm going to say I did it. If I didn't, he knew I didn't. And just really, he was that soft space for me to land.
Yeah, family support is so essential. That's one of the things that you talk and write about, the importance of family support and
Yeah,
also families supporting each other as their children are having these experiences.
absolutely.
Well, from that child who was misunderstood and labeled in school, you've turned out to be a very accomplished researcher of your own and determined not just to be the teacher you wished you had, but also the researcher that's helping us to understand more about these dynamics that happen with children in school. And now you're dean of a school of education. How can
Yes.
teacher education help us address some of the things that you experienced back then, but many children are still experiencing today?
Yes, Flora, there's a phenomenon called a tropic cascade, right? And it's really relating to the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone National Park. And when wolves were reintroduced, it changed the entire ecosystem, even the rivers. And I've
Mhm.
been thinking about this and relating this tropic cascade to education, the School of Education. We are at a point where we can, and I know it just sounds so cliche, but we can change the world. The same way the reintroduction of the wolves changed Yellowstone and even the rivers, because we can teach teachers, future teachers, how to engage with children. And that is just so powerful because when you think about it, we are called to prepare teachers to teach children in a world we will never see or understand. My teachers back then didn't know that they would have to prepare me for AI.
Mm-hmm.
They had no idea. But what we can prepare children for is to be critical thinkers, to be civic minded, to be caring, compassionate people who accept others no matter how they show up. So, in doing so, when we talk about creating be, environments of belonging or addressing inequities, it can start with the professors today who are going to train these teachers to teach the children who are going to live in this unknown world. And that's just the power that we have at that level to do a really, really good job of that.
Yeah, children will be living in an unknown world. We all will be living in that unknown world, but there are things that we do know. And one of the things that we know is that the demography of children who are in school right now, who are in the early years right now, and in their middle years right now, that we have many, many children of color, and that the whole demographics of childhood in the United States of America has changed quite dramatically. So,
Mhm.
the experience you had of white teachers for the first time teaching Black children without any training experience or background, well, now all teachers are going to be in situations where they are teaching and supporting children with backgrounds different from their own. How does
Mhm.
that fit into the mix of your research and what you're learning?
Yes, what we have to understand, thank you so much for that and discussing this changing demographic is the most important thing that we can do as teachers and influencers is to understand that we come to every situation with our own cultural and social lens. And that lens influences everything.
Hmm.
Every perception we have is through our own cultural and social lens, and then it becomes the barometer, the measurement through which we judge and interact with others. And once we know who we are and that lens we come with and how that lens was developed, and to address the biases within that lens, then we can truly accept the differences, the beauty of diversity of every child we touch. I sometimes when I'm speaking for something very simple, people say, Rosemarie, it's not only about race, it's about, socioeconomic background, it's about this, it's about that. It's not only about race. And my response always is, it's not. You're right, it's not only about race, but it's always about race.
Mm.
Always, 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 because no matter how we slice the pie, Black and brown children are at the bottom on every indicator of well-being, and Black children are at the very bottom. And until we address the issues that touch Black children, then our country will always be at risk. Because if we keep plucking from the middle, we never get to the bottom and we never really address the real issues. So absolutely right, Valora, these teachers have to understand that for many of us, all of us, we come in with a bias lens. And once we accept that and address that, which is we can do, then we can see children for who they truly are and the potential that every child has to grow, thrive, and develop.
Well, many teachers say now that they want to have and practice with an equity lens, but many still have the fear of getting it wrong, or they're afraid they don't have the specific skill. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. First, in order to truly create equitable environments, we have to stop blaming or shaming. We do. None of us created this mess, but we inherited it. It is our inheritance. So, in order to address it, we have to create a safe space to address it. And I tell people all the time the only thing I can promise you on your equity journey is that you're going to make a mistake. You're going to misgender someone. You're going to use the wrong words. You're going to say the wrong thing. And we have to be forgiving. And we have to operate with the assumption that we're all here because we want to create a better world. And then my grandmother would always say, speak the truth in love. I was on a webinar with one of my white colleagues, and we were talking about black hair and how important it is that you just don't walk up to people and touch their hair. And she said, and that's whether they have braids or straight or dreadlocks and something else. And the chat box went nuts because she said dreadlocks. Because for so many Black people, we don't say dreadlocks because the roots of that was that the hair was dreadful. So we say locks. And the chat box was going nuts. And I'm on like I am now, and I'm looking at the chat and I'm thinking, how am I going to handle this? And then she said, we need to address it, and I know you will do it with compassion. And that was a wonderful opportunity to say, let me show you how we address something when someone has, made a faux pas culturally. And we talked about it. We talked about the history of it. And I said, and now that she knows the history, I will guarantee you that she will not say that again. But we can't assume everyone knows. We're in different places in this journey, and we have to be forgiving. Now, it's not our place to have to educate everyone. You have to read, you have to be exposed, you have to go to different places. But I encourage everyone, Valora, to have a friend from a different religion, a different race, a different background that you can call and ask the craziest questions you would be embarrassed to ask anyone else. I have a girlfriend, and when I call her when I have a question, I say, hey, girl, white girl question. And I ask, and she knows I'm seeking knowledge, and I just want everyone to have that kind of relationship with someone.
How do you do that today? As you know, this term DEI is being thrown around a lot. It's really often unclear what people mean by it. People have different meanings of it. But at any rate, the connotation that we're having from many policy circles is DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is a bad thing.
Mhm.
So, how are you leading an institution to help teachers have an equity lens, to have these cultural conversations in an atmosphere where the whole idea of doing this work and doing this work publicly is being frowned upon?
Thank you. We have to understand that this word has been appropriated
Mm-hmm.
and weaponized against the very people who need it. The other thing that we have to recognize that no one talks about, Flora, when DEI was outlawed by this current administration, no one understood that 78% of DEI administrators and directors were white women. We
Mm-hmm.
have to talk about that as well because they've put a black face on this when so many people who were leading the work were white women. Then the other thing we have to understand is in some circles, you have to know your audience and you may have to adjust in order not to lose your funding. People don't like to say this, but what we have to understand is that we have a very, very, very wide and broad vocabulary. And we can talk about the same work without using those words and putting funding at risk. And what I'm encouraging people to do is to think of DEI as a noun and then describe it as an adjective. So, what am I saying? I'm saying diversity. Let's think of it as a noun. What is it we really want? We want respect and value and honor for all children. We want all people in our environment to be recognized and valued and embraced. You know what I'm saying? When we
Mm-hmm.
talk about inclusion and um, equity, that unconditional positive regard for every child, that's really the overarching value that every child should have unconditional positive regard, regardless of their race, regardless of their culture, regardless of their language, regardless of their behavior. That we see beyond behavior in all of the superficial things that divide us to ensure that we see humanity. So when we talk about how we frame DEI in a world that has weaponized it, we're talking about seeing the humanity in every person with a beating heart,
Mhm.
and in some cases finding the words that describe that, the action words that describe those terms.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that. I'm wondering also when you think about DEI and as a teacher educator, how that may impact children who have special needs, because that's another part of the DEI conversation that I think is not well understood.
Or discussed,
Mhm.
because when people are anti-DEI, they don't think about children with disabilities whose needs are not being met because inclusion includes children with disabilities. And what we're seeing across the board, especially with the dismantling of the Federal Department of Education, that there are children who have IEPs who need special services who are not getting them. We have seen so many people providing services for example, children with autism. Their funding is gone. Even with the Institute for Racial Equity and Excellence, we have the, he's the top 10th scholar in the country for children with disabilities whose contracts ended and there's no work right now because
Mm.
they're seeing this as DEI. So, what happens to children with disabilities? And when we look at the history of the services, especially parts B and C, those were family led. Families demanded services for their children. And it's unfortunate that some of those very families see DEI as something that's not connected to them. And I think the greatest shock has been that children with disabilities come in all races, all demographics. And now all of a sudden there's this unintended consequence of attacking DEI, not understanding what it does to children with special needs.
Well, tell me about how we can be leaders in this context. I mean, you're in a leadership position, you've been in leadership positions for a long time. There are many people who are child care directors, teachers, leaders in institutions. How do
Mhm.
we navigate this situation as leaders? What does leadership look like? What should we be doing as leaders?
We should never, ever, ever shy away from the fact that every child deserves to be treated with humanity and dignity and that unconditional positive regard. That's the first thing. Regardless of what you call it, what label you put on it, we must ensure that our environments are safe for all children. And secondly, I like to think about leading from every chair, that anytime we witness, we see inequities, microaggressions, and things like that, we call it. And we call it for what it is. And in some cases, you can't say racism, but you can certainly talk about unfairness. You can talk about preferential treatment and things like that. That we should look at our policies and practices and be able to challenge policies that privilege some and oppress others. I was
Mhm.
working with a school district and they wanted more parent involvement. And someone said, well, if we increase parent involvement, we have to make sure that we don't have any child predators. So we should ask every family that volunteers at our schools to get fingerprinted. And I'm sitting here thinking that's not going to work. And that's such an invasion of privacy. And I'm sitting there. But then, even in that role, I had to be courageous. This takes courage. And I said, okay, so we want to increase parent involvement. Yes. And I'm hearing you say that you want the environment to be safe. Yes. But I'm also hearing you say you want all families fingerprinted. Yes. And I said, well, that will decrease family involvement. Well, if they don't have anything to hide, why would they not want to be fingerprinted? People don't want to be fingerprinted for a number of reasons. One, some cultures, there's a culture of privacy, and this is very invasive. And then you have families of undocumented parents and the fear. And then finally, I said, what's the problem we're trying to solve? We don't want child predators. There's a whole database of them. You can get their names, go to the database, check it without being so invasive. So there are ways that we can do this. And I share that story because we have to make sure we're not creating policies that gives us the opposite of what we want. And if we recognize anything like that, then we have to stand up and challenge it. So in a teacher education program, we are constantly looking at how we're teaching. We are constantly looking at the authors of the books that we choose. We can't keep promoting the same early childhood books to get the same results because many of us who went to school for child development, we study the same old white guys, you know, Piaget and Erickson, and there's a plethora of indigenous African American early childhood theorists that we never tap into. So we're challenging our professors to look at a broad range of theorists from every demographic. Like I said, we have indigenous scholars. People have been engaged in early childhood long before these theorists came up. And why aren't we looking at some of their work and how to actually engage with children from other demographics rather than requiring children to change who they are to fit into this narrow definition of what early childhood looks like?
Well, in teacher education or in early childhood education generally, as you're being a courageous leader and encouraging all of us to do the same, what are some uncomfortable truths that we need to face in our profession as we create space for all children?
One of the uncomfortable truths is Um, I said earlier that Black children are at the very bottom in overall health outcomes in terms of indicators for health. One uncomfortable truth is that Black children are born and exceeds all developmental expectations for the first 5 years above and beyond any other demographic, something we don't talk about. They sit up earlier. They crawl earlier, they walk earlier, and in many cases, talk earlier. We don't talk about it. For many, and this is research, anyone can go look it up. We've not had current research, but it hasn't changed. And when you look at Black babies who start sitting up between 4 and 6 months, so many of them are walking by 9 months, talking by 18 months. We have to ask ourselves, what is happening to these children that they're now so far behind in school age? So that's one of those
Mm,
uncomfortable truths that we have to talk about. And this is a Rosemarieism. And I believe that it's the schools that when they get to school, the expectation is that they will not thrive. The expectation is that they're behind. And expectations are lowered, and children are not challenged to grow and learn at the level that they're capable of.
mm,
So we don't talk about that enough, and that's an uncomfortable truth. Another uncomfortable truth, Laura, is that everyone is not cut out to be a teacher.
mm, mm,
That people think it's easy, especially in early childhood. I don't have to know a lot. I'm a good babysitter. And teaching early childhood is a profession.
mm.
And it's a research-based, research-supported profession. And it's not a situation where you can come in and teach based on what you do at home. We hear that a lot. I had a provider who was biting children and talking to her like, why are you biting the kids? She goes, because they bite. And I teach them not to bite by biting them back. And if I bite them, they'll learn that it hurts. And we've heard that.
Mhm.
If you want to do that at home with your own child, that's one thing. But this is a profession. We use evidence-based um, techniques and strategies. You can't do what you do at home. It's like me going to the doctor. I mean, when I was younger and got a cold, my grandmother would put garlic around my neck. When my baby got a baby rash, she would brown flour on the stove. and use it as powder. But if I go to the doctor and he says, okay, you have a cold, go get some garlic, I think that he lost his mind. Is that what you learned in medical school? So this is the same way here. Is that what you learned in your teacher education program, or are you still, seeing yourself as a babysitter using home remedies rather than what you learn in your teacher ed program? So I think that's one of those things that we need to talk about as well. The profession and being professionals and making sure that we are using what we're learning and what can be proven to work for all children.
Yeah, it's really important that I think more and more people are talking about professionalizing the field and what is required of us. I always say that to teach young children requires a really smart and a really compassionate person.
Yes.
The smartest people need to go into early childhood, and the people who most deeply care about others need to be in early childhood as well.
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you because throughout your life, you've shown so much resilience and strength. And resilience is something that I think a lot of us are thinking about right now in the current climate, how to survive, thrive, and continue to move forward in spite of some of the policy challenges that we're facing at the moment. I'm
Mhm.
wondering if you might share with all of us some of the strategies that you used when you were young, some of the strategies that you're still using, that you're even using right now in your current situation, to address many of the questions and concerns we've been talking about today.
Absolutely. And I have to say, Valora, we talked about my family, and just coupled with this deep and abiding faith,
Hmm.
faith, hope, and joy. Um, and my family was full of it. And I'm not talking about toxic optimism where things are always happy and great, because they're not. And they were never promised to be. But what we hold on to is this hope and joy that anytime I've looked at a child, even the child who had the most challenging behavior, I always knew deep in my heart that I had the power to turn that life around. Because I didn't see a horrible, terrible, bad kid. I saw a child who was having a horrible, terrible, bad time. And so that deep, abiding faith and the joy that comes with it and the hope that things can get better. And when I look at what we're going through right now, because this is unlike anything I've ever seen in my lifetime in terms of attacks and abuse of power and policies being rolled back, what I know is that this is not the worst time in this country, that my ancestors went through far worse. And the benefit to me is that they left a roadmap. They left a blueprint for how to survive and thrive and continue in times such as these. And a big part of that was that we are never hopeless, that we know, what did Kamala Harris said, when we fight, we win. And we continue to fight. We do not ever, ever, ever back down or give up. Now, right now, we know there's an attack on Head Start. We know that they want to decrease the standards and go to some states' licensing regs for standards. We have to fight, and we have to fight, and we have to fight. And how do we do that? So even if the standards are rolled back, there's nothing that says we don't have to, we have to adopt them. If the standards roll back, we still have the power to adhere to those same standards, whether they're sanctioned by government or not. You see,
Because they're part of the profession.
they're part of the
They're
profession.
part of the profession. That's who
And
we
we
is
that's
what
who
we
we
do.
are. And that we know that it's what's best for children. Those standards are the gold star in terms of overall standards for early childhood. Why in the world would we give them up because they said we don't need them? Why would we do that? I mean, How many times were our ancestors told that we didn't need to learn to read or write, that we all we needed to do was agriculture and household stuff? And now our HBCUs are turning out the highest numbers of Black teachers and lawyers and dentists and medical folks that anywhere. So no, because the standards change, doesn't mean that we have to change with them.
Mhm. So you are receiving strength and resilience through really understanding who you are historically, who your ancestors were, the faith that you have, and the hope that you have. Are there other specific strategies that you have in terms of your relationships and connections with people or groups that you might suggest to listeners today?
Absolutely. One of the things that I do regularly as a leader, I'm very well aware of who I am and my strengths in those areas where I need to grow. So one of the things that I do is I surround myself with people who have my weaknesses as their strengths. And that requires us in situations of trust to let people know. For instance, I am horrible with a calendar. Horrible, as you know. I can mess up a calendar and double book and triple book. I don't know what it is. I really suspect I have dyscalculia because this whole number thing. But what I've done is I hire a person who handles my calendar for me. It's not my strength. I only mess up when I go in there and mess it up. And she, keep your hands off. And if I let her do her thing, then I don't have a problem. So that's one of the things, even in the classroom, one of the areas I wasn't strong in is that I have a very strong adverse reaction to blood, seeing blood. So my co-teachers always knew if a child gets hurt, my job is to call the parent and the ambulance. Their job is to take care of the blood, right? As simple as that. One time I was in a classroom by myself, child had a bloody nose. I thought I could handle it. Be aware of your weaknesses. And I'm doing the thing we used to hold it back, however you hold it. I'm holding it and I have a glove on and I'm thinking, oh, my mouth is getting juicy already thinking about it. I'm thinking, I got it, I got it. I threw up in the child's hair. And I think that baby now must be 40. He's probably traumatized that the teacher threw up on him, but that's my weakness. So that's one of the strategies is to be able to be in environments where I can be vulnerable and say, I'm really good at this. This is not my area of strength. Let's partner together in those ways. And I think as a leader, we have to do that. And also, as a leader, Laura, we have to be bold. I'm the new dean. I'm 1 month in as dean. And to go in and recognize the awesome work that you've inherited and the foundation that's been built, and to know that nothing stays the same, and to have the courage to evolve and grow and say, this is where we're going, and to inspire people to go there with you is really key as well.
Well, certainly sending best wishes in your new journey as a dean. And
Thank
I really
you.
want to
Thank you.
invite everybody to join us in the after party. If you want to ask a question or interact with Dr. Rosemarie Allen, there's a link that's in the chat that you can click that link in just a few moments at the end of this webinar and join in a conversation with Dr. Rosemarie Allen. Dr. Allen, do you have any final words that you'd like to share with our community today? Really appreciate your being so open about your personal experiences and also what we can do now as educators.
Thank you so much. I just want to say that we have this unique opportunity to change lives early. We get children so young, and we know that 90% of their brain are developed while they're with us. And when we talk about brain science, that's important, but part of developing that brain is to develop kind, compassionate, accepting children. And when that's developed, they become kind, compassionate, accepting adults. And one of the most powerful things I've heard in all of my years in racial equity, when a white woman said, "What can I do?" And someone said, teach your children to love my children.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's one of the best and first steps we can make.
Thank you so much, Dr. Allen. For all of you, would you join us in the after party? I'd really love to hear you interact with Dr. Allen, ask your questions, and see how we might move forward. Do click the link that's in the chat to join the after party. And also, I want to ask you to join us again next month, where we're going to have a really good treat next month, where we're going to have Bonnie and Roger Negabauer share with us their journey as dynamic leaders in the field, and not only in the United States, but also internationally. So we're really looking forward to the conversation with them. Thank you once again for joining us at the CAYL Catalyst webinar series. I'll see you at the after party, and I'll see you next month where we can have a conversation with the Nagelbauers. Good night.